If you're listening to this, I'm going to bet you've experienced a very specific, almost agonizing kind of professional failure.
Right. It's not just failing, which, I mean, that happens to everyone. That's part of the process.
No, this is different. This is that lasting internal misery of knowing you were right all along.
Ah, yes. Seeing it
Getting-
come. Seeing the iceberg, yeah. You've calculated the vector. You've even figured out the exact maneuver that would save the ship, but you're just
watching.
Paralyzed, as the disaster unfolds exactly the way you knew it would.
And that kind of regret, it just lasts so much longer than the pain of a blind loss does.
Oh, for sure.
When you lose blindly, you can say, okay, lesson learned. But when you lose, knowing you have the answer locked inside your head, that certainty becomes this massive weight.
It does. And our source material for today's deep dive argues that this specific failure mode, the failure of communication, not of intelligence, is actually, well, it's highly predictable.
Yes, and that's the key. Absolutely. The sources we've stacked for this, they really pin the problem on a lack of process. They say that insightful people often fail to influence things, not because they lack the intelligence or even the guts, but because they lack a systematic, defensible way to translate that private certainty into public strategic action.
And that is exactly why we are unpacking the IBAR Critical Thinking Method today.
IBR.
Yep, IBAR. The framework is presented as this structural intervention. It's a deliberate tool designed to change the game and, maybe most importantly, to remove that specific regret we're talking about.
So our mission today?
Our mission is to break down the 4 steps. Identify, benchmark, assess, and recommend, and really show how this process gives your thinking the essential spine that needs to be heard and adopted when it really, really matters.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this. We're aiming to give you the tools so you never have to walk away from a critical situation, just internally confirming your own earlier unshared diagnosis.
And what's so fascinating here is that the sources don't treat this as some kind of psychological failing.
Right. It's not a personality flaw.
Exactly. It's a process failing. The insightful person might have a swift, accurate intuition, but intuition by itself. I mean, it doesn't really pass the tough scrutiny of organizational politics or, these data-driven environments we all work in.
So you can see the flaw, but without a formal, defensible method to present it.
It just stays as an opinion. It never becomes a real argument.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? An opinion versus an argument. And when you think about who this affects, I mean, the sources frequently highlight introverts. But not because they're shy. That's a misconception. It's because they're often deep thinkers who, and I love this phrase, they carry insight silently.
That's it. They're the ones who've already done the comprehensive analysis in the background. But then the moment comes for that high-stakes intervention.
And they struggle. They struggle to quickly structure their certainty into something that management can just grab onto and, adopt right away.
Well, it's almost an internal confirmation bias challenge. You know the answer in your gut, you trust it completely, but then someone asks you why.
And you can't just instantly produce the 10 data points that validate that feeling.
Precisely. So IBAR is essentially a translation tool. It takes the fast, powerful, but sort of inherently vulnerable language of intuition, and it translates it into the strategic language that organizations demand. Data, context, risk, and a clear path forward.
And the sources are so clear on this point. IBAR is not about making you smarter.
No.
You're already smart. This is about enabling action. It's tactical. It's about removing regret. I mean, to put this in really stark terms, if you don't use a structure like this, the alternative is that you spend the entire duration of the organizational failure just internally validating how right you were from the start.
Which is just devastating.
Devastating.
The whole goal here is to make sure you stop carrying the insight silently and start carrying the strategy openly. It builds a path for you, step by step, that you can actually stand behind.
Because every single component is formalized and documented.
From the initial observation to the final recommendation, yes.
Okay, so if IBAR is the antidote to this regret, let's look at how the authors say we should tackle that very first moment of uncertainty. We start with the first letter, I, for identify.
Right.
And the sources demand you identify the real issue before it explodes.
The timing here is so critical. Just like you said, IBAR is a preemptive framework.
So you can't wait until it's a full-blown crisis.
If you wait until a failure becomes a crisis, you've already lost. The conversation just shifts from, strategic evaluation to emotional triage.
Damage control.
Damage control, exactly. So IBAR forces you to engage with those early signals, the rumblings, the symptoms, and trace them back to their root cause, which is often, buried pretty deep.
Okay, hang on a minute. Isn't that just standard root cause analysis or RCA? I mean, every business analyst knows that.
Yeah.
How does IBAR make this first step any different?
That's a great question because on the surface, yeah, it looks the same. But the difference is the intent and the immediate connection to the next steps.
Okay.
Traditional RCA is often used after a failure to see what went wrong. IBAR's identification step is designed to immediately build a structured defense before a failure ever happens.
Ah, so it's forward-looking, not backward-looking.
Inherently forward-looking. And what's more, IBAR insists that the identification has to be framed in a way that leads directly to benchmarking, which RCA doesn't always mandate. It's not just diagnostic, it's preparatory.
That makes a lot of sense. So you have to identify the real issue, not just the symptom. Like if your company's losing talented people, the surface level issue is attrition, right?
That's the symptom.
But the real issue might be a toxic middle management layer or, I don't know, completely inadequate compensation benchmarks. IBAR demands you drill past that surface pain to find the structural flaw.
Exactly. And once you have that non-obvious, deeply identified structural flaw on the table, you move immediately to B for benchmark.
The second step.
The second step. And the instruction here is crystal clear. Benchmark so you're not guessing, you're grounded in reality. This step is where that silent certainty finally transforms into evidence-based strategy.
Okay, this is where we need to get specific for our listeners. Benchmarking. It sounds like the bridge between intuition and actual proof. So if I've identified the real issue as, say, an inefficient fulfillment process, what exactly am I benchmarking that against to give my insight some credibility?
Well, the sources suggest a few really powerful ways to benchmark. First, you can go against industry best practices. What is the undisputed leader in your industry doing? How do you stack up?
Okay, external comparison.
Second, you can benchmark against historical internal data. How has our own organization performed on this specific metric back when we were successful?
So an internal comparison against our own best performance.
Right. And third, and this is maybe the most compelling one, is to benchmark against the cost of delay or risk. So for instance, if your identified flaw is a slow product release cycle, you need to quantify what that speed gap actually costs you. What is the expected monetary loss versus a competitor who's faster?
Wow, okay, that third point. That elevates the entire conversation instantly, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It moves the discussion from, hey guys, I think our process is kind of slow, to our process is 40% slower than the industry average, which, by the way, translates directly to an expected monetary loss of $1.2 million this quarter based on historical market trends.
There you go. You've just armed your insight with a dollar figure.
You're not just a complainer anymore.
Precisely. This is the moment where the quiet thinker gains significant leverage. If your argument is, I feel like our security is weak, I mean, that's so easy to dismiss.
Yeah, thanks for your feeling.
Exactly. But if your argument is, the independent assessment shows we are operating at Tier 2 security standards when our compliance structure demands Tier 4 and 70% of our competitors are already at Tier 5, well, you're no longer arguing from opinion. You are arguing from validated external evidence.
What I find challenging about this step, though, is actually getting the right data. How do the sources suggest we avoid, analysis paralysis? Sometimes the most insightful people get stuck trying to prove the problem 100% before they dare to speak up.
And the sources address this. They emphasize that the benchmarking just needs to be sufficiently grounded to provide external validation. It doesn't have to be exhaustively conclusive.
Okay, so good enough data is better than no data at all.
IBAR is about speed and action. The goal is just to collect enough data points to contrast guessing against a grounded reality, and enough to defend the recommendation, not enough to write a PhD thesis on it.
Right.
And the pressure of moving on to the next phase, A, for assess, is what keeps the whole process moving forward.
So we've got the identified issue, we've got the validated proof from benchmarking. Now we have to use that clarity to move to the next step. A, for assess.
Right.
And here we need to assess the risks clearly before emotion or, internal politics just takes over the whole conversation.
This step demands a really dispassionate analysis of the consequences. You've proven the flaw exists, and now you must detail the exact downstream risks if no action is taken.
And the sources say it's crucial to separate the qualitative risks from the quantitative risks.
Yes, that separation is key.
So let's clarify that. If we stick with that fulfillment process example, what are the different risk types there?
Okay, so qualitative risk might be reputational damage. The risk that repeated delays are going to alienate a key customer segment. That's hard to put a number on immediately, but it's strategically severe.
Very severe.
The quantitative risk, though, is much more concrete. It's the expected monetary loss we talked about, or the number of project days you're going to lose, or maybe the calculated percentage increase in future material waste because of the flawed process.
I see. So by structuring the assessment this way, you basically remove the opposition's ability to dismiss your insight as just anxiety or pessimism. You're not predicting doom. You are simply reciting the evidence-based consequences of inaction that you already built up in the I and the B phases.
It gives you complete control over the narrative. When someone pushes back, you can point to the quantitative risk assessment and say, that's not my opinion. That's the calculated financial exposure if we continue on our current path, benchmarked against last year's performance.
That clarity just enables much better decision-making because the costs are suddenly tangible.
They're real.
Which brings us to the final and I think the most demanding step, R, for recommend. This is where the rubber meets the road.
It is.
You must recommend a path you can stand behind out loud on record.
And the sources stress this so much. All the insight, all the benchmarking, all the risk assessment, it's completely useless if it doesn't culminate in a clear, defensible, actionable path forward.
Identifying a problem is critical, but
recommending the solution is what ensures you are actually listened to.
And the real power, for me, is in that phrase, out loud, on record. This is what transforms the private insight into a public strategy.
You're not just presenting a problem anymore.
No, you're staking your reputation on the solution that you derived from this whole IBAR framework. You're demanding accountability, not just from the system, but from yourself as the insightful person.
This is the moment of maximum strategic force. You have structured your thought process so meticulously, from identifying the flaw, to proving it with benchmarks, to calculating the precise risks, that your recommendation is no longer a guess.
It's the only logical conclusion.
It's the only logical conclusion from the evidence you've presented.
You know, the genius of the IBAR method really seems to be that it creates this machine that prevents the insightful person from being ignored.
It's a structure.
The structure, yeah. So that quiet certainty can be confidently shared as a plan, and you're treated as the expert you actually are. It's an argument trail, not just a random suggestion.
And if we look back at our earlier example of, say, an individual who noticed a budget flaw, it's no longer just Sarah's gut feeling that we're spending too much.
Right.
It is now Sarah's analysis, identifying the structural cost overrun flaw, I, benchmarked against last quarter's successful budget B, assessing the risk of insolvency within 6 months A, and recommending 3 specific sequenced cuts to return to compliance R.
That structure, that is the spine the source material keeps referring to.
That's the spot.
It ensures you move beyond just thinking when it matters to actually acting when it matters. Failure is, well, it's inevitable. But the greatest lesson here seems to be that regret lasts so much longer. And that regret comes from having the foresight, but lacking the tools to translate it into effective action.
And that really brings us back directly to you, listening right now. If you are someone who consistently sees the patterns that others miss, who identifies the flaws before they become public knowledge, you really have to ask yourself,
what's my process?
Do you have a structured framework? An intentional process like IBAR to ensure your quiet certainty is never just dismissed, but is instead transformed into a decisive, defensible strategy.
Because if the greatest pain in a professional life is knowing you were right and still losing the game, then the solution has to be a structured methodology for intervening decisively.
So think about the biggest, most nuanced challenge that's currently sitting on your desk. What structured method will you use this week to ensure your quiet insight never remains silent again?